Yeah. So, like I said, or like Lamar said, a couple of things we're going to talk about today. I'll introduce who Genesis is and what Pure Cloud is, which is the product that I work on. We'll also talk about how we operate and how we integrate Sumo Logic into our platform so that it's consistent across all aspects of everything between development, security, and operations. And then we're going to talk about a couple of use cases. I'll give a few use cases of each of these. It's kind of an interesting thing. They wanted specific use cases for dev, ops, and sec specifically, but it's not as clear as that. A lot of times, a certain dashboard or something like that, depending on the context that you're looking at it, may be a development thing, it may be a security thing, or it may be an operational thing. So I tried to make them nice, like clean. This is a development use case, but as you'll see, some of them, depending on the context, fall into all three. And that has to do with how integrated Sumo Logic is into the platform, into how our development teams use it. And lastly, which I find is one of the most useful parts, I'm going to talk about a couple tips on how we've been successful to use Sumo Logic. I have 5 tips for how to be successful, and I'm lying because I actually have 8 tips. There's 5, and then I have a few other quick tips that we'll go through really quickly. I have 42 slides, so we're going to move this along pretty quick. All right, so this is me, Brad Segobiano. I'm on the Pure Cloud infrastructure team. We have a misnomer a bit with that. Sometimes we're called the DevOps team. Again, I'm not going to get into, DevOps is a cultural thing. Anyways, we are responsible for the entire automated CI/CD pipeline, and we're also responsible for any integrations with third-party things like Sumo Logic, New Relic, PagerDuty, any of our third-party vendors that we deal with, Amazon. If I'm talking a little bit off, it's because I only got 3 hours of sleep because I did get alerted last night. I'm on call. So I got alerted by Amazon last night every 30 minutes since 3 in the morning. So been with Genesis for about 2 years, and I used to be in the Marine Corps. Just quick note, the fish is 5 pounds. So if you heard any of my other talks, he was 4 last time. We did a reweighing. He's 5 now. So I'm also speaking at reInvent. He'll be 6 by then. All right, so who's Genesis? So Genesis is the leader in contact center software. 23 times, I'm standing in the way, but 23 times in a row, we've been the leader in contact center software. We have 3 products. All 3 products do the same thing. We have Pure Connect, Pure Engage. Those are a on-prem and a hybrid cloud solution. And we also have Pure Cloud, which is what I work on. It's a born in the cloud, 100% deployed on AWS SaaS solution for contact software, multi-tenancy, all the good stuff. A little bit about kind of the scale at which we operate. We're above 4 million conversations. What we consider a conversation is a call, a chat, all these things on the left. So call, chat, messaging, emails. Messaging is SMS, and or SMS. And we've just actually included Facebook and Twitter. That went GA today for what we consider messaging. Callbacks and chat. So these are unique conversations with a unique customer. So this 4 million agents had a conversation with a unique customer. So it's not like repetitive things. There's 4 million unique ones. So that may consist of a lot of back and forth, but each of those aren't counted. It's unique, which is pretty impressive. About 21 million weekly is our average. That's 36 a second that we're doing for conversations. So that's a little bit about Genesis and the product I work on, which is Pure Cloud. But let's talk about how we operate and how we're able to integrate Sumo Logic into our platform consistently all over the place. So there's a whole bunch of numbers. I'm going to try to go through pretty quickly. So how we operate. I wanted to get through this slide pretty quick, but we hit a whole bunch of the markers, right? We had DevSecOps, microservices, stateless, knockless, immutable, CI/CD. Everything is code. Infrastructure is code. Born in the cloud, AI, and serverless. We're moving about 20 to 30% of our workloads onto serverless right now. I think we have about 1,000 Lambda functions running. We haven't yet unlocked Docker or blockchain, but we'll get there. No, actually, Docker, we actually use AMIs for our immutable artifacts, so we probably won't ever get Docker. We don't do on-prem deploy, so we don't consider it a needed thing. But so a bit about the culture. So within Pure Cloud, we have hundreds of microservices. The teams that created the microservices are responsible for their code. They're the ones that set up the alerts. They're the ones that get alerted. They're the ones that are responsible for if there's an issue. They own every bit of the code that they write. And this has worked very, very well because I get alerted less. So a big part about it is configuration is code, so everything we do is in code. It's in their GitHub repository. It's contributed with their code. Their alarms, their dashboards, every bit of that, their JSON blobs that are inside of their code. Next time they deploy, they make a change. New changes are out there just as soon as their servers are up. We do the cattle's not pet mentality. Everyone's heard of this, right? So there's really three ways to if you have a problem in production, there's really three ways you can go. You can either kill the server, have a new server come up, because everything we deploy is an autoscaling group. So kill the server, have an autoscaling group spin up another instance. You can deploy forward, you can deploy backwards. That's it. We don't SSH on the host. We don't muck around in production. That's it. Those are the three ways you can go. So forward, backwards, or kill the instance and let a new one come up. That is the exact same image that was there before, just new. A little bit of the numbers. So we have 200 plus microservices. We're deployed into 10 AWS environments, all 200, most of the 200, and 5 AWS regions. We have 9 Sumo Logic accounts. Last month, we did 121 terabytes of logging. It's a lot of logging. We're a logging company. We're a log generation company. And we've been a Sumo customer since 2014. So before we took our first production customer onto the platform, we were already using Sumo Logic. Sumo Logic log aggregation was a requirement. It's in our commandments of microservices, thou shall not kind of thing, that you will have log aggregation. A bit on the scale over there related to the AWS stuff. So we have 7,000 EC2 instances for the non-AWS people. That's a instance, virtual machine, whatever you want to call it. Auto-scaling groups, that's a one-to-one mapping with microservices. So overall, the 200, if you do the math there, you're going to come up with about 3,000 auto-scaling groups, because like I said, everything's deployed into an ASG, and a whole bunch of other nice giant numbers that cause me headaches sometimes. Collector registry. So when every single one of our hosts comes up, we register that collector as a unique collector against Summa Logic. So here are kind of the numbers on a single day. So we kind of have a load test that will usually ramp up in one of our environments throughout the day. So at this point, we went up to about 600 and something instances within an hour that we were just launching. For whatever reason, our platform's scaling out. We horizontally scale all of our instances. So our platform's scaling out, load tests are happening. We have an incredible amount of churn with our instances. We're constantly bringing them up. They're going away based off the auto-scaling groups and the policies associated with them. This is just a little bit about the pipeline and kind of some of the interesting facts. All of our servers in prod are less than 30 days old. That's a requirement. We have to do that. That's a set in stone security requirement that we do. Our median instance age in the lower environments is 3 days. So that just kind of shows you how quickly we're redeploying. And we do not have an operations team. We have all the microservice teams who are responsible for their own code. We have a 13-man infrastructure team, which is the team I'm on. And we have a security team and an SRE team, and that's it. There are no operations. Deploys per week. So this is a unique auto-scaling groups that we deploy. In dev, we do about 1,500 deploys to dev. Prod, 348. So you can see how we can easily get that less than 30-day instance life. Most of the time, we don't ever even come close to approaching that. Sometimes with stateful services. So because of that scale, everything has to be automated. The numbers here are huge. There's no way we could do this without having automation for every bit of this. So what we do and the way we kind of integrate Sumo Logic into our pipeline is, like I said earlier, we're using immutable AMIs. That's an Amazon machine image it's a deployable artifact. It's an image of an operating system. Amazon releases an AMI twice a year. We pick up that AMI as it comes out, and on a weekly basis, my team generates a new base AMI with the latest Yum updates in it, with Sumo Logic pre-installed on that image. Development team comes along, writes their code, pushes to Bitbucket, Jenkins picks it up, and then that reaches over and grabs the base AMI that has all the latest security patches, because we don't do any patching in production. We are just pushing out new AMIs. This guy then builds a new service AMI, and that is now our immutable artifact. That stays the same for everywhere, right? That goes to dev, that goes to test. That's the thing that we're promoting around. So that artifact never changes. This is the build. So this is what we would call the equivalent of a build, right? So we've built our immutable image at that point with Sumo Logic pre-baked into the host. This is at launch time. So at launch time, we have two phases. We have the base configure phase, and we have the service configure phase. Now, during the base configure phase, we, as in my team and the security team, have defined what things need to start on the box before the team is allowed to do their stuff, right? So some of those things are starting the Sumo collector with a whole bunch of default sources. Now, this is really important. So what we do is we we have already said, like, we are going to log everything that's in var log message. We're going to do everything that's in var log secure, right? We have a whole bunch of predefined ones that no matter what you do, those are going to be logged. And then we make extensible sources that the team can then extend if those are not enough, right? But it's guaranteed all the hosts are going to come up. They're all going to have Summa Logic running. They're all going to have at least the minimum default sources. And then the teams themselves can extend that if needed. So when the service team's code runs, they can extend the Sumo sources by modifying the JSON sources file. And then they can start their application. This is an example of the extensibility of the sources. So right here on the left, these are the defaults, right? So we have user data, audit, messages, secure, syslogs, Ansible, because we're using Ansible for configuration management. And then this is an example where people can say, oh, I want the HA proxy one. So they'll just put a little Boolean in the template, and it's all a templatized role in Ansible. So they'll just say true on Sumo sources HA proxy, and then now it's a source on top of the default ones we've laid down. This is very, very powerful for us being able to guarantee that the security team's queries that they're running are capturing everything they need to. Same thing with the DevOps tools. We're guaranteeing that those sources are there, and we're able to ingest them. We're able to build queries, dashboards, whatever we need. All right, so this is the part where I was supposed to get very clearly defined DevOps sec cases for all these things. I love this slide. So we log everywhere. We log in development. We log in dev test. We call dev test. That spans multiple AWS environments, but we log dev, test, prod, all the same. All this is the same because the artifact that we originally created is the same. They're different Sumo accounts that we're logging to, but they're the same. What's interesting about this is only 35% of our queries that our users do, all those different microservice team owners, are against production. The vast majority are against non-prod, which is, and personally, where you want to be. Right? So the reason for this is because in the non-prod environments, that's when they're doing the real heavy lifting in the Sumo side. They're like looking into what's going on with the code. That stuff should have never made it to production. And then it turns out really the majority of the production queries are either one, RCA or troubleshooting after the fact, or they're security scans or security tools checking to make sure things are okay and from a security aspect inside of prod. So I thought this was a really great one to kind of get the distribution and why it's important to log everywhere. So performance testing, this falls into the development case. So that we double our production load in our test environment every day. We run it, we call it the BAT, the big test. There's an A word in there, but I don't want to say it. BAT, you can figure it out. But so we run this test every day, and we monitor all the performance metrics. We're doubling our production load here every single day. Again, remember that big scale up we saw where it went up to 600? This is the guy who does the thing. He's the bad actor in this case, or the good actor. CI/CD pipeline, and this is where I said things can kind of get a little, it's not as clearly defined as this is a development function, right? If I was looking at, did the prod deploys work? That's more of a production operational thing, right? Less so a development. But all of our CI/CD pipeline dashboards and those types of things that we build out, because of how frequently we're churning out these environments, these dashboards have to exist, and we have to have queries, we have to have different alerting mechanisms around these things, just because of how much we're deploying. There's no way we could monitor these dashboards or monitor these things. We need to have automation in place that alerts us when there's a problem, and then we look at the dashboard. Third-party integrations. So again, it's on the line of it's not necessarily a development case all the time. This could be an operational case. So this is showing promotions and JIRA tickets and how far they've gotten in the process. So user created a bug or something like that. Did it get promoted? Is it, how's it interacting? So operational. So the way that Summa Logic is kind of fitting, I don't know if it works. Do I have it's hard to see. Anyways, so the way that it works, kind of how we fit Summa Logic into the pipeline here. This is our EC2 servers. They're going to put pushing metrics to New Relic, and New Relic would be alerting on PagerDuty. But we also have this channel where alerts are coming directly from Summa Logic directly to PagerDuty. And there's also a third one here that's not actually mapped where we're actually going from CloudWatch directly to PagerDuty. PagerDuty is kind of the unifying thing there. But after we've involved the person, after something's happened, an incident's happened, and this alert channel's been kicked off by whoever, by Summa Logic, New Relic, CloudWatch, hitting the API for PagerDuty directly, whatever you're doing. It goes to the development team who's responsible for that service. They all are in PagerDuty, so every one of them is in PagerDuty. They all have escalation policies and schedules and things like that. I can tell you 100% the first place they go is to Summa Logic for troubleshooting. The first place they're going to go. And what is great about this is they've already they already know what they're doing. They did it in dev and test. We already saw that because the vast majority of our queries are in dev and test. So it's a very trivial thing for them to jump over here and write their, go bring up their saved query that they have and like, oh, yep, here's the problem, and immediately push out the resolution. The low-hanging fruit or the obvious one here is operational dashboards, right? Every microservice we have has an operational dashboard. This one happens to be Dialer. But every single service has their own operational dashboards. They change with deploys. They can change them out and do whatever they want to modify these as needed. Scheduled searches. So in this case, I don't know how many people are using scheduled searches. We're using it to look for a specific Kafka message, can't rebalance after 4 retries. So pretty simple, pretty easy way to get that alerting mechanism, to go back to this, to do this, right? The direct to pager duty, or if it's a less of an operational thing and more of a routine thing, you could go from Summa Logic directly to the developer via email. It just depends on what type of channel you want to alert on. So this is for, like I said, Sumo is very, very critical in troubleshooting. So our teams are constantly passing around Sumo queries back and forth between each other, giving people like, hey, here's the dashboard, or here's the query that I'm running, this is the error I'm seeing. And this one's pretty good. So notified through pager duty immediately from DevOps, so they got an alert, immediately researched the issue in Sumo Logic. They did a bunch of stuff to push out a fix, and then they monitored, after they pushed out the fix, they kicked off a deploy with Skynet, which is it's a deployment orchestration tool we have. They kicked off a deploy, and then they monitored the deploys to dev, to test, and then to prod to make sure the issue was resolved, and they weren't still seeing that. And they're doing all that through Sumo. So all of this was done through Sumo. So they found the initial issue, they deployed a fix, and they watched it go into our environments, dev, test, and then prod, to make sure that they weren't still seeing that error. Corroborating event data. So every time we get any of our RCAs, or we have some bit of analytics that we're getting maybe from the metrics platform or from internal tools and things, we always bounce that up against Sumo Logic to make sure that it all matches up and kind of find the correlation between the two. All right, so the security use cases. I only have 2 slides on this, and this is what I was saying again, back to, they kind of all fall into things, but we're using scheduled searches here, and we are alerting. The one on the left is for recent unsuccessful promotions. That could be a security thing, that could be an operational thing, that could be a development thing. So that one's kind of on all 3. The other one over here is more of a security use case of ACL changes. So I have a whole bunch of stuff up here. I'm not gonna read through it, but these are some of the different things that, from a security aspect, that we're querying in Sumo. And it kind of falls back into what they were discussing earlier about some of these being pre-built in some way. Sorry. Yeah, there we go. So things like open ports, changes to security groups, those types of things, all of those things are monitored through different queries against CloudTrail or different Sumo Logic source categories. I highly recommend you go to Jared Sexton's talk for democratization of security. He's from Pure Cloud. So he'll go into more details about this. All right, so some of the best practices. So ingest all of your infrastructure logs as much as you can. Specifically, this guy, CloudTrail, ELB logs are also really great, but CloudTrail logs for sure. I don't know how many people are actually ingesting all of those, or what the equivalent is for Google Cloud or Azure. I assume they have something. But yeah, your CloudTrail logs, this is one of our most queried source categories, is CloudTrail. It tells you who did what in the account and why and when and all the information you need about that. It also gives you really great insight into how Amazon works under the hood, because you get to see Amazon internal services making API calls to other Amazon services, which can give you a lot of insight when you're going to make like service tickets with Amazon if you had a problem. Transaction correlation IDs, stitching IDs. Has anyone ever heard of this? So what we do in all of our environments, we're doing this for a couple of years now, so we've gotten very, very good at it. We have common logging libraries for all of our microservices depending on the language. Every single request that comes into any microservice, it looks to see if there's a correlation ID header. If there's not a correlation ID header, they generate one and they propagate it to all outgoing requests. So in this example, I found a random correlation ID and I searched it in Sumo and counted by the source host, and that correlation ID touched all these microservices. So all 7 of these, there are this many logs associated with them for that single request. What's really powerful about this is if somebody drops the ball for the first microservice that gets hit drops the ball, the next one is going to then generate the correlation ID and pass it along. But since we're using common libraries and everywhere, nobody really drops the ball on this. But this is extremely, extremely powerful. Now, the difference here, as opposed to something like New Relic or some of the other APM agents that can kind of do transactional mapping type of things, is that we can do this for messaging, like not standard RESTful messaging, right? We can do this for SNS, we can do this for Kafka. That correlation can be propagated however we need to through whatever mechanism or messaging bus that we're using. So it makes it very, very powerful to be able to search one string and see every log across hundreds of microservices that are associated with it. The TAM program. So Sumo Logic has a TAM program. You should ask about it. It is great. So the TAMs and the SEs are awesome. Use them. Please, please use them. They're grateful for kind of the account how-tos, the administration of your Sumo Logic accounts, like setting up data partitions and field extraction rules and all those types of things. They're really great at helping you understand what makes sense for you, not necessarily like what the generic recommendations are. They're a great asset for training. So our TAMs come out quarterly, I believe, and they do office hours with the development teams, all the different microservice teams. So if they need help, hey, I need help writing this query, or I'm working on this dashboard, can you guys give me a hand? Those guys are there, and they're super helpful for that type of stuff. This is the big selling point for us, is the Genesis context, I work for Genesis, but context-aware support channel. The care organization for Sumo, I believe they're called the care organization, are awesome. They're great. But during this outage, during when things are on fire, this is great to have, because you're not having to do the, like, did you turn it back off and back on again kind of context that you would normally have to give. So this is very, very powerful. And they remove blockers during outage. So that's pretty much what I was saying about this context-aware support. So during an outage, the last thing you want to do is you want the resolution to be fixed as quickly as possible. And that's what the TAMs are awesome for, and the SEs. And then obviously like roadmap and planning. These guys do a great job of that type of stuff. Keeping up to date with all the new features. I already knew about all this stuff. It's great. No, so so yeah, so it's really a great thing. So like I said, the TAM program and engaging the support and engaging your SEs and all those guys, I definitely do it. Educating your teams on how to track logs. So we have 200-something microservices. I have a couple hundred engineers. They don't care how much they log. I don't know if anyone's run into this problem, but you can kind of have services that will go awry, right? With that big, oh yeah, I turned on debug and went on vacation for a week, and then shoots up. So I'm actually using search templates here, parameterized searching. So this is when I distribute to kind of service teams and say, hey, look, just pop in the name of your microservice here, and you can look at your logs and see how much you're logging. Once we started to do this, a lot of the microservice teams took responsibility for what they're logging and did a complete audit of all the stuff they're logging and realized, oh, hey, look, we're duplicating logs. We're sending superfluous logs. We don't need to send this. There's no point in sending this stuff. So it's really good. Educate the teams on how to track logs, which goes really well into my next point, which is log volume can identify an issue. So this has happened several occasions. In fact, this one, I think this is the hydrant service. And this goes back to the TAM program. Jeff, who's our TAM, called me and said, hey, you guys are logging a lot. And I said, okay, let me look. And I went on there and looked, found this service that was going nuts. I think they were, what were they? They were failing their database connections. They were just spewing like 45 million logs or something a minute or an hour or something crazy. And but that team had no idea what was going on. So log volume, the fact that you're logging more can actually identify that there's an issue. So this was a couple weeks ago when this happened, and just yesterday, I didn't have time to update the slides, we had the exact same thing happen with a Mongo node, where the Mongo node was spewing out a connection failed because too many open files. And the exact same scenario happened. TAM contacted me, so we have that kind of bi-directional relationship with the TAM program. Tim contacted me, said, hey, you guys are blowing up your log ingestion. Can you take a look? I looked at it, and yeah, spewing logs, millions and millions of logs for no reason. So, and those teams were completely unaware that that was happening. All right, so I said I had 5. I got my quick tips. All right, respond to Sumo queries respond to questions with Sumo queries. So currently we're trying to bring a whole bunch more of the engineering teams on board with the way that we operate within Pure Cloud. And one of the big things we found is if somebody asks you a question, just give them a Sumo query back. Don't give them the answer, just give them a Sumo query. If people have a Sumo query to play around with, they're much more likely to take that, tweak it, and make it their own and save it and use it again and not pester you next time. So respond to questions with Sumo queries, it's great. Engage the TAMs early, so don't be hesitant. Well, if you have the TAMs or your SEs or whoever support in general, engage them early. Like don't be hesitant to engage them. Just get them on the line. If you have questions, just get your questions resolved. That's what they're there to do. Automate everything. So like you saw earlier there, all those different servers, all those different things, all the amount of stuff that we're spinning up, we cannot maintain if it's not automated. Recently, we just started to spin up more AWS accounts, and turns out we said, oh, well, we need to automate the collector creation around CloudTrail and ELB logs. So we went ahead and did that. So now, next time that we spin up a new AWS account, we get a new Sumo account associated with it. We run a small script that runs a couple API calls against Summa Logic, and boom, we're ingesting CloudTrail, we're ingesting ELB logs, and we didn't have to do anything. It's literally a 2-second process. Log everywhere. So as I showed earlier, most of our queries are in the lower environments, and that's great. We much rather you have vetted your queries and you've used your queries and you're comfortable with the query language and you know what to do, and that way when you have a prod issue, you know what's going on. You can simply bring up that old query and you're perfectly fine. So I think that's it. 42 slides is fine. Anyways, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Yes, I think they give to you, Mike. I think I have to listen in here.
Yeah, the only thing that's amplified is so that you can hear it.
Perfect.
I'm just wondering if there are best practices you have for how you're sharing queries. So you said you do a lot of query sharing.
Yeah.
Like, are you linking to them? Are you using codes?
Codes.
That's one question. Second question is, since you're doing a lot of, it sounds like you're generating a lot of the queries in the lower environments, are you exporting those and importing them, or how are you promoting queries through the environments?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this question was about content sharing and sharing between, let me make sure I got it right, you're sharing between, like, within the same account. There was 2 questions. One was across account. Yeah, code. So we use, so within the same account, if I'm going to send somebody a link, I use code. You're talking about the share as opposed to the link versus code? Always code. We never do the links. That has to do with, we have so many Sumo Logic environments, it sometimes is a little wonky when it'll kick you out of one and try to log you into the other one and stuff, so we use codes for pretty much everything. Usually we'll say, here's the code, it's this Sumo account, or it's dev or something, and they know where to go look. The other part of that, so we really, really want to get content sharing, like APIs in place, so that when we provision that new account, all your dashboards are there. They're great, and they're there, and you just have them. So that's the next step in that automation process. Yeah, we've gotten to where we're going to automate the collector creation for the ELBs and the CloudTrails. That's done. User management, all that stuff's done. The last part is content sharing when we make a new account. What's a little interesting to try to solve is that sometimes all the content doesn't easily shift over, right? Depending on if you're a completely different AWS account, that's not necessarily, it's very easy if you have like dev test prod, right, within the same domain of microservices, but it's a little bit different when you start going into like, oh, now we have a new AWS account that has a different set of microservices. What content do you copy and what do you not? So ideally, I think as part of that infrastructure as code thing, everybody's queries will end up in their repositories. The ones that are related to the operational dashboards will end up in the repositories, and those will be deployed. And the individual stuff, we'll have to figure out some kind of system to say like, yeah, like I opt in. I want my content from X copied to Z, and we orchestrate that in some way. Yep, that was a good question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've got a 2-part question. The first, if you could give us a little more insight on querying the Sumo Logic API and how you auto-deploy your collectors. It sounds like you have a lot of collectors.
Yes.
So what's your mechanism for keeping those up to date and automating that portion of it? And the other piece is, you talked about Ansible. Are you using Terraform or Puppet or any other infrastructure as code to maintain your infrastructure?
Okay. So I will talk your ear off about CloudFormation. So we're a big CloudFormation user. In fact, everything we do is CloudFormation stacks. Our CloudFormation stacks are one-to-one mappings with our microservices. So yeah, that's what we're using for that. The configuration management side is Ansible. So when your host comes up, so during the bakes, I don't know if I go back all the way to those. Anyways, I can go back there in a second. But so what we do is when that base AMI gets generated, it's grabbing the latest Sumo Logic collector, the install collector. We're talking about install collectors here. We don't really use any of the hosted collectors. We have very limited use of them. We use them for CloudTrail, ELB, Lambda logging, and RDS logging. But besides that, everything is an install collector. So on that weekly basis, when we say, okay, we're going to release our AMI that has the latest Yelm updates, it contains the latest Sumo Logic collector. So then when the team picks it up, they have the latest collector. And like I said, when the host comes up, the collector starts. So it's already there running for the teams. They're just saying, yeah, I have more sources, or I'm cool with the sources that you give me out of the box. So, but yeah, we are trying to get, like I said, as much of this needs to be automated as possible. We have to really get it down. So, did I answer your question? Okay, great.
Hey, just a quick question. You mentioned that one of your most queried source categories was for CloudTrails.
Yes.
Is that just because the devs are doing a lot of really low-level debugging, or just curious about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it has to do with the scale of our AWS accounts, like and how many resources we have within AWS. We tend to get a whole lot of queries around the CloudTrail and the infrastructure-related stuff. Usually that has, I would say, this is just me theory crafting, but I would believe it's because of the immutability, because usually it's something related to the infrastructure, specifically in the lower environments. So in the lower environments, most of the time it's the intern deleted this instance, right? Or those types of scenarios. So you get a lot of that type of query. Since most of the stuff is immutable, the only time those guys really go in there is when they're troubleshooting an issue to actually run a Sumo query. They're not usually in there, minus going to view their dashboard or something like that. Most of the time, the only time they're in there is when they're doing some troubleshooting. And a lot of times the troubleshooting, specifically in our lower environments, we call our lower environments the Wild Wild West. The development teams can spin up whatever they want in the lower environments. You want to spin up C4 8XLs and do something crazy? Sure. Probably costs a bunch of money and I'll probably delete it. Well, I'll delete it. We have a tool for deleting. But yeah, the tool will delete it. So anyways, but yeah, so there's a whole lot of playing around in the lower environments. But once you get up to the higher environments, you've already had that immutable image in dev and it's baked and it's vetted in the lower environments. So yeah.
What is your strategy for collecting RDS logs in Summa Logic?
I'm sorry, collecting which ones?
RDS logs?
RDS logs. I don't know the details. I know it's a homegrown solution that we're doing for RDS logs. Same thing with the Lambda logs. Those are both two homegrown solutions. They use a hosted HTTP collectors, which if anyone knows, if you get rate limited on hosted HTTP collectors, those logs are off to the nether. So make sure you have some form of retry logic. Currently our implementation, I believe, is Lambda functions. So we're somehow sending them to Lambda, they're batching them in some way, and then they're shipping them off. I don't know all the details on it. I'm trying to stop that. So that's how our Lambda logger works, and I'm pretty sure that's how the RDS logger works. We're trying to stop that, and I'm hoping to push them to S3 and use hosted S3 collectors to read from them, because those will have retry logic, and you can use SNS topics to make them much faster so that you can almost live tail the logs and stuff. But unfortunately, I don't know exactly how that's implemented. So. Anything else?
Other questions?
All right, so I'll be around if anyone has questions and want to talk about Docker, because I don't like Docker, but it's a whole different thing. But anyway, so yeah, so that's pretty much it. I think we're good. Perfect timing. Great.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well,
thank you, guys.
Bradley.